Hey, what is up, everybody? Nate Liss of DynastyRankings.com. You can find me on Twitter at an outraged Jew. And I brought in Cody Carpentier. You guys can find him on Twitter at Carpentier NFL. I dragged him back in. I featured on his show recently. For those of you guys that don't know, Cody is a mock draft analyst extraordinaire. Just released his mock 5.0. He's way ahead of the industry. Cody, where can people find that?
You can find Mock 5.0. It's 3 rounds over at playerprofiler.com in the NFL draft section right at the top of the bar.
Awesome, man. I love it. And so I wanted to bring Cody back on here. Now, I've been in the dynasty space and fantasy space for a really long time, but getting into the world of like granular NFL draft analysis, more in Cody's case, boots on the ground, being more involved with reading the tea leaves, following these big-time analysts, and trying to figure this all out. Cody has a really great pulse on this, and we were talking pre-show about the difficulty from a perspective of somebody like Cody, who's very tied in amongst sort of the draft community, what's happening in college football and the NFL, sort of reading the moves of teams and trying to decipher what the moves are going to be based on team fits, where these other analysts, for instance, like, Peter Schrager here, we're going to go through his mock draft 1.0 because it's just wild as shit. But like, it's very hard for a guy like Cody to put together the most accurate mock draft that ever lived because you don't have the ear of a GM and you don't have the ear of the top area scouts for some of these teams. So kind of tell people how hard it can be to try to figure out the fits for these teams.
It's incredibly hard. I think Josh Norris is one of the best ones on Twitter to follow going through this process because he digs and nags at a lot of these, area newscasters and people that are actually in the building every day getting interviews, not every day, but getting interviews with the teams and the coaches and the GMs and asking the questions. And then he's like, hey, man, what does he say about this guy? What does he say about this guy? And then he's posting the visits. He's posting what the visits mean, et cetera, et cetera. And that's really what goes into it for us that are on the outside or that are not the Jeremiahs, the Mel Kipers, and of that level, or the Rappaports. It's a lot of research. The 3-round mock that I did took me about 28 hours to do. I spent like 2 straight days in a damn dungeon filling that one out. And that was 104 picks I think I got in through there. And it's just like, it's a lot of research, and you think, oh, you're out to pick 80. Why don't you just start putting, the best player you like there? It's like, well, I want to be in the ballpark. I want to be positionally something that they're interested in, somebody that they've interviewed, somebody that pro day they went to, somebody that we know they interviewed with at the combine, et cetera, et cetera. You want to be in the ballpark on those things. And round 1, like we're going to be viewing here today with Peter Schrager, and is really what the competition comes down to for mocks. It is like turning into what it feels like to me is like a new March Madness.
Yeah, no, that's such a good way to put it. And I think the thing that, a lot of people that read mock drafts, and Peter Schrager's, for good reason, we're going to see in a second here, a lot of people were outraged. And there's 2 things at play here. One, obviously, this isn't going to be his last mock draft prior to the NFL draft. And the one that gets graded most of the time is the last mock that you drop prior to the draft taking place. But the other thing with this is mock drafts aren't necessarily the player that you love the most, but the fit that you think is the most likely with a team, right? So just because you have wide receiver X over wide receiver Z doesn't mean that's your personal rank.
Bingo.
So, yeah, so we're going to see with Peter Schrager's mock here. Now, I know you went back and did a little bit of research on kind of Schrager's maybe accuracy sort of amongst his mocks last year. Looking back at the data, I think Peter Schrager ranked as a top 4 mocker in 2022 overall with his final mock draft, which, again, when we look at how many hits he actually had, maybe Cody can tell us, it's crazy to think that he's a top 4, top 5 mock drafter because I'm not even sure how many he really got right.
He got 5 right. He got the Trayvon Walker 1, Aiden Hutchinson. He got Sauce Gardner and Wilson to the Jets. And then he got Penning to New Orleans. But if you go back and look at the first 2 mocks, which we're only going to get 2 from him this year, he got 3 done last year. The early mocks, he had Tyler Smith to Dallas. He had Devonta Wyatt to Green Bay. So it's really just reading between the tea leaves. He was close on about 8 picks. And another thing that goes into the grading is not always just getting it right, getting him on the team, but you also get points for having the exact, for everybody that's in round 1, you get a point for that too. So if you get all 32 of the guys correct, they were just on different teams, you're still going to get points for that.
Yeah, exactly. So you get partial credit on that. It is so hard. And I've been listening to a lot of Daniel Jeremiah and Bucky Brooks and these guys this year. And it's like, you can even hear DJ, who might be the most tied in of like any of these analysts. There's a few out there that are really great, But even he's out there talking about how he's not even totally sure how this is all going to break down. I mean, just at the top, just the core, we don't even know. Well, I guess we're fairly confident what the 101 is now, but we really don't know the chain reaction that could take place at 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, if a quarterback doesn't go at 2, then there could be an entire domino effect. And that's kind of what he alludes to. And I'm sure your mock drafts, you've taken some big swings, taken some attempts on, picking where these guys go. So, Cody, are you going to have another mock, or is 5.0 going to be the last mock? I mean, if you just put 28 hours in, you have another 30-hour day in you?
No. Mock 6.0 will be the final one, and that'll be coming out next Wednesday night when all the official mock are due for grading. That'll come out at 8 o'clock at night next Wednesday. And that's only going to be one round. I'm not going to be doing 3 rounds, so it's not going to be 28 hours. But I'll be in Kansas City for that one. I'll probably be sitting down with Alex Dunlap, and we're going to be iterating like mofos all Wednesday night.
Love it, man. No, it's exciting. I'm glad you do this. You are light years ahead of me when it comes to mock draft analysis. I have no idea what people are thinking. I just know how these fits with teams tend to look. So let's rip through this thing. We'll talk about some of the wildness of this mock, maybe hit a couple fantasy points if we feel like we want to do that. But let's roll through. Let's start at the very top because the spice starts right at the very beginning. I don't think there's really a question here. So he started with Bryce Young, 101 to the Carolina Panthers. That's pretty much locked in at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, the odds moved heavily into that favor the other day. He's over minus 1,200, I guess, on all sports books right now. And according to people that know, as soon as it kind of reaches that 800 to 1,000 range, that's when it becomes game over. Now, when you listen to like Scott Fitterer in his press conference the other day, he's already talking about putting Bryce Young on a nutrition plan and all this other stuff. And really, when everything shifted, it all shifted at the combine for CJ Stroud. And to me, that looks like that was just a direct answer to he had a good combine, and Bryce Young didn't do anything. So it shifted towards Stroud, but it was always Young back then, and now it's right back to Bryce Young. And a lot of people have come out and they said, if you're going to trade up for somebody, you're going to trade up for Bryce Young. You're not going to trade up for CJ Stroud. And I think that is the answer.
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, amongst the fantasy community, a lot of knocks are going to be on Bryce Young for his size. And admittedly, when he does perform in the future, if he performs well, it will be an outlier by many regards because there just isn't a long history of quarterbacks of this size, even though I've made the case numerous times that there's not really a correlation between his height and, fantasy points. But nonetheless, I digress, Cody. Let's look at number 2 because this is where the shit really hits the fan, in my opinion, because what happens here is the Houston Texans trade the pick in the division to the Indianapolis Colts so that they can select CJ Stroud. In a million years, would this ever happen?
I don't see a world where it does happen. Now, the incompetency that we have seen from the Indianapolis Colts over the last couple of seasons, shockingly, because I love Chris Ballard, would they do something like this? Yes. But would Houston do something like this, only moving back 2 spots? I don't know what kind of draft capital they're going to get. I don't know if they're going to get a first in 2024 out of them without exchanging some other picks. And again, like you mentioned before the show, you got to have some cojones if you're going to give them the quarterback of their future, hypothetically, right? Number 2 overall, yeah. You're going to have to deal with that one. You're in the middle of a rebuild. You're going to have to deal with that one for the next 15 years if it's a hit.
Yep. And if he starts to produce immediately, middle of year 1 into year 2, and you've got to face that in the division for the next decade plus, you're going to regret it. The coaching staff's going to pay for that in the future. I'm not saying it's impossible, but the draft cap, the trade value would have to be so immense for this to ever go through. I just can't imagine this happening interdivision. But CJ Stroud, interestingly enough, kind of on a bit of a slide. I know in your mock draft, you had him go as QB what?
I had him going as QB4 to the Seattle Seahawks at number 5 overall.
Okay. I mean, as a Seahawks fan, I wouldn't be mad about that. But I think if we rewind the tape about a month, people would say QB4, you've got to be out of your mind, right?
100%. But again, Bryce Young is now that locked in number 1 guy, and the allure of Anthony Richardson. Las Vegas was trying to trade up to number 1. Was Las Vegas trying to get Bryce Young? I don't know. But were they trying to get an athlete at quarterback? Maybe they're trying to replace Jimmy. And then I love Levis to the Colts. I think Levis to the Colts is that's like my locked in spot right now as far as any of these draft capitals go.
So at 4, without them moving one bit, you think Levis at 4 is your pick?
I would say yes. I do have them moving up to 3, but I think if they're sitting there at 4 and Levis is there, I think they make the pick.
Got it. Yeah. So they'd have to trade with the Cardinals. But yeah, I agree, man. I just thought that this was where Schrager. So Schrager does two. There's a few things, but of the two most notable things that stirred up controversy, this was without a doubt the first one. But the next one is incoming, Cody. We're going to skip through some of these defensive players here, even though, feel free if you want to stop me on any of them. But right here is where we see the Seahawks taking Anthony Richardson. Again, I mean, I don't hate it. I really don't hate it because the Seahawks were gifted the 5th overall pick. And when's the next time Seattle's going to be sitting in a position to get a dynamic playmaker like Anthony Richardson? It's probably going to be a really long time. What do you think about this pick right here?
I think the pick makes sense on the surface as the Seattle Seahawks putting Anthony Richardson behind Geno for 1 year. It's exactly what he needs. There's a lot of different views on Anthony Richardson, so I'm going to be very interested to see where Schrager goes in his next mock, because a guy like Richardson, if you're listening to the Michael Lombardis of the world, they don't think he belongs in the top 10. And Michael Lombardi, he has a son that literally is in the Las Vegas Raiders front office, so he kind of has a feel for that, right? And then you have guys that think maybe Richardson is the athletic enough. I talked to Alex Dunlap about this. He thought after the combine, trade for number 1, take Richardson right now. He's the next Cam Newton. Like, people are all over the board on Richardson. So 5 right here feels fine. But again, this is one that I'd really want to see his next mock come out where he has him, because that'll be the truth tell. That'll be the truth tell, because when he talks about his mocks, this first one he puts out, he goes back, he talks to people, and they say, man, you're crazy, or man, you're spot on.
Yeah.
And we're going to see where he changes this one too.
Yeah, you're hot, you're cold. I mean, and he is so tied in that, again, the fact that he got a couple right last year, that being a good thing, is still surprising, but he's so tied in. I am interested to see how much movement we see next week. So let's keep rolling along. Yeah, obviously you had Atlanta taking Bijan at 8 in your mock draft, but here we see him going to the Philadelphia Eagles at 10. Does that seem like the sort of the line in the sand at this point for Bijan?
It feels like it could be. Now, Evan Silva's talked about this. Zierlein's talked about this. A lot of people have talked about landing spots for Bijan and what makes sense. 8 has been the go-to spot over the last week and a half as far as mocks go. 10 is also of interest, obviously, because Miles Sanders is gone. They need a running back. Roshan interviewed with the Eagles at the Combine, and Roshan said, man, the Eagles need me. Like, that was a quote that came out from Roshan. So it's like they need a running back. They want a running back. Now, did they interview Roshan to get dibs on Bijan? Maybe. I don't know. But as far as floor goes, I think there's a world where if he falls past that 13, 14 area, I think that's where people start to go, maybe I'm going to trade up for him. So I like this spot, but I just don't know if Philadelphia has the gall to do this. I think Howie would much rather build that defense.
Yeah, I mean, you're sitting at pick 10 coming off of a Super Bowl appearance. It's like, you could take advantage of a premier defensive player here, or help something on your offensive line if you needed. Bijan, I mean, it would make this a superstar offensive roster. I mean, there's no question that they're already up there, but you put Bijan in that backfield, I mean, it would be devastating for defenses. So here's where shit hit the fan part 2. Now, obviously, you sort of have stated your feelings about Will Levis, but in this class, where do you have Will Levis ranked amongst the quarterbacks in your personal rankings?
I have Will Levis as quarterback 1.
Okay.
And I have hit Will Levis as quarterback 1 because of a couple of things. Well, mainly one, and that is projection. The number one critique I have for everybody when it comes to quarterbacks, and everyone always says, we go off of draft capital, what the NFL tells us. Well, the NFL is the same as Twitter. Everyone says what they know, what they think they know, what they have seen. And that tells me that everyone thinks CJ Stroud's the best. And you can go on Twitter and that'll tell you that today. Everyone hates Will Levis, and everyone thinks that Anthony Richardson doesn't have the arm to do it. But if you can project and if you can look at the right things, that's kind of why I'm led to Will Levis. And I know that's not a very favorable take these days on Twitter or YouTube or anywhere, but that's where I'm at.
Right, but that was a conclusion against Josh Allen, right? Like, people said Josh Allen could never make these strides forward. You look back at his college production, you look back at the completion percentage. People had to cite guys like, I think, Brett Favre to show even like a sliver of a guy that couldn't complete high level of passes in college. and he's murdering in the pros. I mean, he is the classic example of when you take this mold of a fantastic athlete with all the arm talent and abilities in the world, you put it together and you get a game-changing talent. I understand that, and I understand that's why you look at Will Levis, and you did a feature recently, did a radio spot, and I heard you talking about sort of the ability to be more forward-thinking about these guys. A lot of the guys on Twitter, especially where you and I spend a lot of our time, they kind of are in a time capsule, and that time capsule stops whatever the stats in 2022 said. That was the end of it. What they did is what they will be, right? And that was kind of the statement you made versus guys that are really tied into the draft that are more forward-thinking or looking at his abilities, thinking about him as a fit in an offense, building around him, giving him the weapons, sort of focusing on what he does well. And if he sort of hits this ceiling, and you swing for the fence, right? If he hits this ceiling, then you get this dynamic, great player. So, but the real problem here was that Hendon Hooker, by many regards, is a guy that's supposed to be in the day 2 conversation, but amongst a handful of mocks has found himself creeping way up above that. So by my count, this is now this is 5 quarterbacks, and they've put Will Levis, your QB1, at QB5 behind Hendon Hooker. What are the odds Hendon Hooker would end up a top 11 pick or end up in Tennessee?
That's a great question. If I had to today bet on that, I would put that in the range of about 40%. I don't think it's going to happen. I think when you look at the quarterback position, the conversation. You can kind of look at last year's conversation in the same way, right? Everybody had Corral, Pickett, Willis, Ritter mocked in round 1 last year, and we now see that was a colossal failure. Now you look at this year, and over the course of the last month, it was quarterbacks are going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And then Adam Schefter came out yesterday or 2 days ago or 3 days ago, whatever day it was, and said, I would not be surprised if there's no quarterbacks going number 2 or number 3 overall. You just have to be open to these things because we get so deep in the what they call it, the draft industrial complex, that it's like, this is fact. And then all of a sudden it completely flips on you day of the draft, and we're not ready to handle that. Now, is there a world where Hooker can go QB3, QB4? Sure. Do all these guys go top 10? I think we need to be open to maybe that not happening, as you see here with Hooker and Levis.
Yeah, and that seems to be the narrative more and more as we're getting closer and closer to draft day. I feel like the clues are being leaked a little more, and what's happening is whether these things play out or don't play out, I think we're being conditioned a little more to accept the fact when they do. We still might be blown away by it, but it's not for lack of evidence that people tried to state it. Now, there is one thing. Now, Hendon Hooker is way up here, and we did say that Peter Schrager is fairly tied in. I mean, that's 20 picks above the second round. So when you see that, how much BS do you think is behind that? Because, again, is Malik Willis last year, you mentioned his name, there was so much hype around Malik Willis. People were so convinced that he was a day 1 guy, top 20 guy, maybe higher. He was in an argument to go with the Detroit Lions at 2. We saw him way at the top of the draft, and then he doesn't get selected till the 3rd round. And it was this crazy game of poker. Like, how? And Schrager, I think you looked at his mocks last year. He had him very high as well. Like, is this Malik Willis all over again? And I don't mean is Hooker going in round 3, but is this sort of some synthetic information getting sent his direction on Hooker to be this high?
Well, we saw this with Mike Tannenbaum a few weeks ago. He put him at number 5 overall. Now we're seeing it from another big name guy in Schrager, putting him at number 11 overall. And I think it is a overreaction on purpose to let everybody know that, hey, this guy needs to be more in that conversation, because just a short time ago, he was looking at the 70s and the 80s overall, and he was getting completely ignored. And then he's gotten pumped up over the last few months. And yeah, he doesn't belong in the 70s and the 80s because he's a good quarterback, and he was in the Heisman conversation last year until he got hurt. Should he be in the 40s and the 30s? Correct. I think that's a good range for him. And I think that these two guys, Tannenbaum and Schrager, putting him 5 and 11 is just saying, hey, warning, warning, warning. Yep. This guy's a top 40 pick. And, overreacting is what it is. You bring up Willis last year. Schrager had Willis 20th overall, 20th overall, and 20th overall in all three of his mocks. So he was pretty dead set on him going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. And like I said before, nobody's perfect in this. There's never been anybody perfect in these mock drafts. It's similar to the March Madness, like I mentioned before. But you got to read what's given to you. You gotta decipher what's right, what's wrong, what's leaked, what's smoke, what's right. And we'll see where Hooker goes. Is there a world where he can go ahead of Levis and potentially top 10? To answer your question, like I said, 30 to 40% is where I'm at.
Okay, if you had to guess right now, though, out of 100%, Hooker going round one, what percentage are you putting on Hooker going round one? Because right now on NFL Mock Draft Database, I got him at a 20.4% chance of round one selection. Where are you at?
20.4% to go. You should say it again.
Yeah,
you said 20.4% to go.
round one percentage.
I was gonna go up. I was gonna go probably 65.
Okay. No, I think that's fair. I mean, again, if Schrager's got him way up here, maybe we're having a flashback to last year, but he's way up here now. So, all right, let's roll through this thing a little bit here. Pick 15. This is where Jackson Smith-Njigba comes off the board. First receiver off the board at this point. Pick 15. Funny that they're finally putting weapons, as Schrager even talks about here. Rodgers is likely gone, and now they're putting weapons around Jordan Love.
Yeah, this is interesting. This is, I think, a great pick here, putting Jackson Smith with the Packers because, like I said, Jordan Love needs help. Jordan Love has Watson. He has Romeo Doubs, if you think that's a weapon. And then he also has a couple running backs in that backfield that I know you like from the Scott Fishbowl team last year.
Yeah.
And last year they were mocked Treylon Burks, Jahan Dotson, and Jackson Smith. They're sitting in a perfect spot at 15 because if he doesn't go 12 to Houston, which I don't think he does, I think he could trip a couple more spots and 15 falls right into Green Bay's lap. Now, you look at Green Bay and you look at trends. 11 of their last 12 first-round picks under Brian Gutekunst, defense.
So are you saying if you were playing the trends, if you were playing the pattern, why wouldn't you continue to build around defense if you're going to end up with a quarterback that isn't Aaron Rodgers? I know that you need weapons, but if you can play defense, you do take some of the pressure off of this young quarterback that's being thrust into this position. So are you saying that there's a chance that they sort of stick to the trend to continue to build around that side of the ball?
It wouldn't shock me, right? We'll see. It's interesting that he puts this here because last year, like I said, he had them taking Burks and he had them taking Devontae Wyatt at 28, and pinpointing a guy like Wyatt at 28 is pretty impressive. So it tells me he knows something about the inner workings. Now, again, at 22, he had them taking Treylon Burks. Burks was long gone by 22, and they ended up taking Quay Walker. So it's telling that he has them taking Jackson. They need the help there, and I think that's a prime spot for the first receiver to come off the board.
Got it. Yeah, no, man, I'm with it. So then right after that, first tight end off the board, Dalton Kincaid goes to the Washington Commanders at pick 16. What are your thoughts on tight end coming off the board this early?
I don't love it. A lot of the tight end conversation needs to be, I think over the course of the next year or two, it's really going to be emphasized. But at the NFL Combine, talking to some people with the Dallas Cowboys especially, they mentioned just the fact that this tight end group overall, not this group, but tight end as a position is turning more into the running back position that we've seen in the last 5-6 years where it's getting pushed down. Yes, the fourth round is not looking like the third round, or the third round is not looking like the fourth round for running backs, but tight ends now, it's like, why am I spending a first round pick on these tight ends? Because they don't break out until they get traded to the next team.
Right.
Why am I using that? Unless it's generational, like a Kyle Pitts who goes 8th overall. Why are we spending that first round capital on these guys? And Kincaid's a guy, he's a great receiver. He's a great route runner, but he's 240 pounds. He's 23 and a half years old. He's got a back injury, and the talent is there, and everyone raves about him being an extension of a receiver. But should he be going if he's that good of a receiver? Is he as good of a receiver as Jackson Smith-Njigba, and does he belong in this area? I don't think that the NFL loves the tight end position, and I think it's only going to continue to get suppressed. Now you look at last year's class, he did have Trey McBride going in round 1. Trey McBride went early round 2. It's just another one of those positions that I'd like to keep an eye on as his next mock comes out. I wish we got another one before the final one, but we're not going to. But yeah, if there is a bet out there, I would take it being only one tight end going in round 1. I think it would be Kincaid.
Yeah, and his name tends to pop up there. But you're right. We look at some of the top guys in the league and where they came from. Andrews, the back half of the third round. Obviously, Kelsey, third-round pick. Pitts was an early selection. Kittle was a fifth-round guy. Freiermuth, Goddard, these guys are second-round picks. Dulcich, third-round pick. So you can get production if you're looking for a guy that's a productive tight end in the passing game, especially for a team that we don't really know the story at quarterback currently. Sam Howell seems to be the guy that's leading the situation, but if you need a weapon in the passing game, you could certainly probably wait or trade for some of these other guys, these tight ends that are available. But at 16, I agree. He seems to be the guy that sticks around. Scrolling through the rest of this mock here, and then here comes another tight end. So you said likely that we only see one. Here comes Michael Mayer coming off. Pick 21 to the Chargers to play with Justin Herbert. I mean, you've kind of laid out your case for Kincaid. Any difference in thought here? You still think this is probably a pick that's unnecessary for this roster?
I think it's unnecessary. Now, Daniel Jeremiah is a guy that often talks about Kincaid, and Daniel Jeremiah does preseason football games for the Chargers in the booth, and he has a pretty good feel and a pretty good thought that the Chargers are going to go after a tight end. And is it right? I don't know. I don't think so. If it was me, I would prefer Mayer out of the tight end grouping. But I think you just look at this Chargers team, it doesn't make sense from an analytical perspective to go after a guy like Michael Mayer. And I think they heavily push towards analytics in making these decisions.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And the Chargers, with so much changing in the landscape of this offense, you got running backs that want to leave. We've got wide receivers that are aging. I think there's a lot of questions here. It would be interesting to see this selection actually go down. Then to the Minnesota Vikings, we've got Jordan Addison landing here to pair him up with Justin Jefferson. And we have seen offenses with a dynamic duo of receivers, whether it's Devonta and A.J. Brown or T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. We have seen guys thrive as number twos in this offense. With Kirk Cousins on the last year of his deal, what do you think about Jordan Addison here?
I love it. I like him or Zay Flowers. I think both fit well in this offense. Personally, I have them trading back down to 33, first pick in the second round, and getting a receiver of their choice out of these two guys as well. So I like it. How do you? I got a question for you. How do you feel about Addison in fantasy in Minnesota? Because to me, that feels like a dime landing spot. Now, Cousins is on the last year of his contract, but how do you feel about that?
I don't hate it whatsoever. This was a team, I think last year they were number 3 overall in total passing targets. I think they were number 2 in pass rate to the wide receiver position. I don't hate it because I think it exists. We look at that team last year, and I believe we saw over 100 targets went to our man. Let me pull it up real here. Over 107 targets went to Adam Thielen. We had 90 go to KJ Osborne. I think there's a world that exists where a guy like Jordan Addison can find his way in an offense where he thrives with Justin Jefferson doing the Lord's work on the outside. I wasn't a huge fan of Addison, but I don't hate this fit. I think there's a lot of people that are going to dislike it because the idea of playing in tandem with a guy that's already so relevant. But again, with Kirk Cousins, who may not be there forever, we saw Kirk support 2 top 12 wide receivers on numerous occasions. And again, we're seeing this happen with the Bengals. We're seeing this happen in Philly. So I don't hate it. I think a lot of people would prefer to say this is a bad spot, but I'm with you. I actually think that this is a decent spot overall. Sliding down, then Zay Flowers. You just mentioned him. Here he comes to the New York Giants. They don't have many tall receivers, but now they take Zay and add him to this offense. Do you like this fit?
No. I love Zay. I think the Giants need a big body. I think, they have Isaiah Hodgins out there, but he's a very good number 2. I think you need to go find an alpha. And there's not a lot of alphas in this class, but there is one that kind of fits that mold, Quentin Johnston out there. That one would make more sense to me at this point, or trading back and getting a Mingo or a Cedric Tillman. I love Zay Flowers. This is very interesting to me that he would put him here because, again, it doesn't fix the speed problem, which Darius Slayton hasn't been healthy. They haven't been able to stretch the field as well. And it doesn't fix the size problem where Isaiah Hodgins is there, like I said, but there's no true alpha. There's no true speedster. Zay just kind of fits in with everybody else. Richie James and Wanda Robinson. It's kind of a weird fit. It did catch my eye though when I saw this one.
Yeah, and I think you're kind of alluding to sort of what we talked about a little bit to start this show, that when you try to collectively make a selection that makes sense for a team, he feels so redundant in this offense. Like he doesn't And you hear it now, and I think it was Daniel Jeremiah that actually it was Lance Zierlein on the Establish a Run podcast. He was kind of talking about how, back in the day in the NBA, it was center, power forward, small forward. Now they're giving these guys like stretch two. They're retitling positions to sort of fit this new world of offensive philosophy. And in this offense for the New York Giants, if you're building it like a basketball team, as a guy like Bucky Brooks has mentioned before, Zay is so redundant. I think you're right. Johnston is a guy that stands out more, or yes, trading back for some of these bigger, more alpha type receivers to sort of give Daniel Jones, who they've extended, another weapon out there. So it's interesting. And for fantasy purposes, I'm not the biggest fan of it because Daniel Jones has been a low area ADOT passer, which, I thought was better for other members of this offense, but I really hope that Zay Jones does go somewhere other than the Giants. I'm not a big fan of this fit. With that being said, though, Dallas Cowboys get Jahmyr Gibbs. This is a spot that we had talked about, maybe Kendre Miller ending up later in the draft. I'm assuming they're not going to end up with Kendre later if they end up with Jahmyr Gibbs at 26. We talked about it on your podcast. It's a little rich for a running back, especially one of this size. What do you think about Dallas?
It's very interesting, isn't it? I think we know that they're interested in running back, but it's the opposite archetype and the opposite body build that what I saw coming. I was thinking Charbonnet, Kendre, Roshan, right, Bijan, and they go after the 199-pounder. It makes you think that maybe there's a different angle as far as what this offense is going to do, because it has an identity, but I think that it is in a situation where the identity could shift. Use two backs, split it 50-50, a lot of pass catching out of the backfield from both guys. They have Lamb. But again, Cooks is like the number 2 right now. If it depends what you think of Gallup, but it would be an interesting offense to see. But having Gibbs in round 1, I think in itself is a tell.
Yeah, and it's for sure. And I think it's interesting. I was going to look back on the mock draft website. I think he had about a 35% chance of going in round 1. So he was fringe anyways, round 1, round 2. But you look at them last year, it's really interesting. For all the targets that went around at the running back position, of the total targets that Dallas had, only 15.6% of them went to the running back position, which was actually bottom 7 in the NFL. So you add him in there, and he's about, 10 pounds lighter than Tony Pollard is. Pollard is on a franchise tag for 1 year. So, they get him in the first round. You get the 5-year deal on him. And this is something that, again, Zierlein on this podcast talked about. If you're a team built to do it, you take a guy in round 1, you get the 5 years out of him. You could franchise tag him for 2 years if you wanted to. You get 7 years out of a guy, and then you let him walk. So, it is potentially possible to take a guy in round 1 if you're built to do it. It's just Jahmyr Gibbs, and we talked about this, just feels more like a guy that requires a fit. And I do like the Dallas offense, but very interesting, especially with Tony Pollard still there. But I guess this would mean that he's likely gone at the end of 2023. So for all you Dynasty owners, get ready for that one. Then we've got another tight end comes up here. Again, you said 1. We're on our third now?
Yeah.
So We've got Darnell Washington to the Cincinnati Bengals, which just signed Irv Smith. It is a juicy spot, when we sort of project what could be. What do you think about him going to the Bengals?
I think this one's blasphemy. I think this is going to change when it comes out. I think Darnell Washington is going to be a guy that falls when the NFL draft comes around. It's going to be one of these guys. Last year in Schrager's mock 3.0, he had Trey McBride going 31 overall to the Cincinnati Bengals. We talked about this on Friday on the Futurecast. I mentioned Gibbs, the guy we just finished talking about, to Dallas, going to Cincinnati and actually playing in that Clyde Edwards-Helaire role for Joe Burrow from LSU days. And I think that is a different angle that this offense could take, where they've been trying to play tight end. They've been trying to have C.J. Uzomah and Hayden Hurst, and now they signed Irv Smith, and I think they just re-signed Drew Sample. I don't think tight end is an angle that they're actually actively shopping for in the NFL draft. I think they'd rather draft a receiver to try to replace Tyler Boyd or T. Higgins down the line than they would to draft a tight end, because I think they also understand the importance of that. The Mixon stuff has come out. I think receiver, running back, if you're going to go on the offensive side of the ball for a weapon, I think receiver, running back are much more of a focal point. And that's not even talking about Darnell. I don't think Darnell deserved to be a top 32 pick or 31 for this year's class. Darnell had a tough process through the pro day, but I do think he's a second or third round guy.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because you look back at the Bengals last year, and they ended up bottom 4 in the league. 15.7% of their targets went to the tight end position. So you have to ask yourself, taking him at 28, which again is rich for a tight end, are they even going to utilize him in this sense? When you talk about Sample and we talk about Irv Smith, and I think they have Devin Asiasi there and some other names, like you've got the who's who of guys that have been trialed and errored all over the place. It doesn't make sense. But again, going back to the theory of trying to find the right fit for an offense, Bijan's off the board. If Gibbs was actually sliding, the dynamism of this offense with Gibbs is probably significantly upgraded versus what you're going to get out of Darnell, which again, as we've mentioned ad nauseum on other shows and this one as well, you're probably not going to see the real guy for 3 years if you ever see that guy. But again, this is a team already rostering numerous guys that never fired in their first spot. 2 third-round picks that didn't fire in spot number 1. Here they are in spot number 2. It's such a dangerous position to spend this level of capital on. With that being said, though, speaking of level of capital, now I know you're probably a little higher on this guy than most people, but Jonathan Mingo, who has fucking surged up the draft boards, he is now officially being mocked in the first round. We've seen him mocked in the first round actually quite a bit now. 29 to the Saints. First question is, where do you have Mingo on your draft board? And then what do you think about him getting into the first round?
I have him going number 57 overall to the New York Giants. I think that's a good spot for him. Now, going 29th overall, you're looking at literally, well, the Giants should be looking at him at, 27 or 26, wherever they are. That's interesting. That's very interesting to me that he would put Mingo there. Now, we saw this from Lance Zierlein last week. He put Tillman at 31. They're playing around with these other guys, and this is completely against Quentin Johnson. It's his fault. He's the guy that was supposed to come in at 6'4", 215, be 4.40, jump 40 inches, and be the unequivocal alpha of the class. And now you're opening the door for a guy like Jonathan Mingo. I have Jonathan Mingo as my wide receiver 6 in the entire NFL draft class, and I don't think he will be a first-round pick, but it's interesting to see him putting him here because, again, he's not a guy that was an alpha in college. He didn't have over 500 yards receiving until that 4th year at Ole Miss. He has alpha tendencies, but he has not hit that alpha level of output. And again, he's had 4 years at Ole Miss. He's not a junior, 861 yards last year, and he did have a 4.46 40 at 6'1", 226, direct line to A.J. Brown. But again, This guy's not A.J. Brown, and A.J. Brown was a middle of the second round guy.
Yep. And that is really what is kind of like helping pump him up is the comps to A.J. Brown. Those have really helped him thrive, that athleticism. And I will say, one of the other big factors is the fact that he is 6'2", 220 amongst a class full of, for lack of a better term, shrimps. There's a lot of small guys in this class, right? Like, we're going to name the next, biggest sort of alpha wide receiver amongst this first classification of guys. You just brought up Cedric Tillman, some of these other guys that are still like sizable, but man, it would be a surprise to me to see him go round 1, sort of how quickly this has happened, because what changed? We go back and look at his mock draft status just a couple of months ago. He was rounds lower than this. Like what? Obviously you just kind of alluded to, you think that Quentin Johnson and his draft process has helped, Mingo and players like him thrive because they're now trying to substitute in guys that have this build and this athleticism. But what the hell really kickstarted this? Is it just that?
He had a good Senior Bowl. It wasn't great.
Yeah.
Rashi had a tough Senior Bowl. Rashi looked better than Mingo did at the Senior Bowl. Jaden Reed had a fantastic one. Tank Dell did. Tank Dell's not getting pushed up, and Tank Dell's 165 pounds, and he was the best route runner at the event. But then ever since then, I think Mingo did good enough probably in interviews at the Senior Bowl. Now, those are things that we can't obviously partake in, is the team interviews, where he also did at the Combine. He's a great guy in team interviews, and that's kind of what's rubbing off on the Zierleins and the Schragers of the world. But I do think, again, being the 19th most athletic player at the wide receiver position out of 1,112 guys on playerprofiler.com, as far as the athleticism score goes, it matters. His top 5 comparables are ridiculous. It's Allen Lazard, Julio, A.J. Brown. It's stupid. It doesn't make any sense, but he fits right in there. He's a good route runner, and he creates separation inside the 5-yard line, which is key. You see that day after day after day from Devontae Adams, those types, and Devontae's not as athletic as Jonathan Mingo is. I think it's a guy that if he did succeed in those interviews, it's going to be a guy that's going to succeed on the field because the NFL teams like him and they think he can diagnose stuff quickly, and he's an athlete, period.
Yeah, Yeah, and Jonathan Mingo, I'm looking back here, 14.4 average depth of target, number 23 amongst the draft-eligible class. Goes to play with Derek Carr, who had a boatload of deep targets last year. I mean, trying to air it out in that offense. So I don't think he'd be dead in the water in this offense, but he would have to play beyond anything we've ever seen from him. This is where the outlier circumstance comes into play. But you get round 1 draft capital, you're officially you're on the radar at that point. So then last one from this group, 31 picks because we had a forfeited pick in this first round. Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I've been snake bitten by the Chiefs before, okay? For all the wrong reasons. But Quentin Johnston, a falling knife amongst this draft class, goes 31 to the Chiefs to play with the best quarterback of our generation in Patrick Mahomes, who has arguably no weapons other than Travis Kelce. I know that there's a lot of hopefuls in this offense. But he gets Quentin Johnston, and nobody else looks like him in this offense. Kansas City, what do you think?
I think Justin Ross is in Kansas City, right?
Don't do this. Don't do this. If you have Justin Ross in Dynasty, sell now. Sell, please.
I think the amount of love that Twitter gives to Justin Ross, I think if Quentin Johnston goes to Kansas City, we are going to have one hell of a fall camp in Kansas City because, again, Quentin is the alpha body type. He's 6'3", he's 212. He is a dominating human when you're in the same room as him. He looks all the parts of an alpha, but again, he just doesn't play up to that size. Yeah. And Valdez-Scantling's in there. Valdez-Scantling is pretty much what Quentin was supposed to be. This 6'3", 200-pound guy that runs 4.3s. He just didn't meet that mark. He ran a 4.52 at his pro day. It goes to a 4.57. Yes, his burst is 98th percentile. Yes, he's got 90th percentile catch radius. Cool. He was good at TCU. But again, people just getting burnt by this Big 12 thing, and it's killing them. And the NFL pushing him down to wide receiver 5 off the board. Yeah. And behind Mingo is very telling. Jim Nagy's one guy that I pay close attention to. I mentioned Josh Norris earlier. Jim Nagy's another one from the Senior Bowl, the director of the Senior Bowl. He's great through this process. He worked with the Seattle Seahawks and everything. And he has mentioned multiple times on Twitter, just because a guy is an underclassman doesn't mean he deserves to be drafted first. And that was a direct point or direct finger towards Quentin Johnston in the conversation of Jonathan Mingo and Cedric Tillman.
Yeah. And it's interesting because if we play the game of what could be, we look at a guy that, led all of this class for the most part with an 8.9 yards after the catch. Mark, he was a guy that had nearly 50% of his production actually came after the catch. So he's dominant with the ball in his hands. But like you said, basically a 35% contested catch rate, an 11% red zone conversion rate, top 6 in drops at the position. So doesn't play his size. So there is a lot of projection behind him, becoming this star at the next level. But man, if he goes to Kansas City, like you said, if there's this much hype around Justin Ross, they'll build a fucking 200-foot tall iron eggplant emoji and slap it down in the middle of Kansas City if this guy gets drafted, because they're going to lose their fucking minds, man. There's no doubt about it. Like, he will surge up draft boards. So, admittedly, I'm very cautious about interest in Quentin Johnston. I mean, obviously, you have to be aware of him. I watched, you guys did a mock draft earlier. There comes a point where you can't pass on him, but I'm fearful of guys not succeeding at the NFL level, and this would be the spot where every opportunity to be great and play with somebody great exists. So, Cody, we got round 1 knocked out. Obviously, there's going to be more mock drafts in the future. I love getting your takes on this because, again, I don't think people understand how much more work you have to do to be tied in compared to some of these other guys like Daniel Jeremiah is always talking about he's getting a text message from some scout, or he's getting a GM called him last night, or he's just every minute of every day he's tied in. But for you gotta sift through stuff, find correlations between coaches, quarterback coaches and receiver coaches and college ties and stuff like this. So, man, I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I think it's awesome. Again, I've really tried to kind of be involved with what you're doing, support the work that you're producing right now. So tell people where they can find you. Again, let people know when mock draft number 6 comes out. Just tell everybody everything. Where can they find Cody?
We'll start out with mock draft number 6.0. It'll come out next Wednesday, so that'll be about 8 p.m. next Wednesday, the night before the NFL draft. I'll be live in Kansas City doing that stuff with the Player Profiler team, and Alex Dunlap will be down there as well. And he's another strong source you need to be out and paying attention to it from Roster Watch. And then patreon.com/executives. I'm there with Matty Kiwo, my man from Player Profiler. And we have our Cornerstone rankings. We talk about that on a podcast. It's Patreon exclusive. And Cornerstone rankings are 2021 through 2024. So we're already looking at the next class. So you can compare that to this class. Marvin Harrison. There's a bunch of Ohio State guys coming out year after year after year. So yeah, everything's over at playerprofiler.com or patreon.com/executives. And you can follow me everywhere. All socials, Carpentier NFL.
Love it, man. Yeah, again, dude, I appreciate you grinding. You're working hard. You just got done on a live stream for like an hour and a half just to then I shoot you a text. I'm like, hey, man, you want to jump on? Let's record some content. I want to talk about this Schrager mock because it's so insane. Let me change this. I'm better than that. Why don't I just change the screen, right? Look at that. Look at his hair. Look at that hair, man. It's a great look. And I appreciate that. Dude, you just jump, right? The minute I'm like, hey, Cody, are you available? You always are, man. So I appreciate that. You're doing great work. I'm going to keep following what you're doing. I'll keep pumping it everywhere that I can. And guys, again, follow Cody. Go check him out on Patreon. He does really great work. I can't say it enough. So thanks again, Cody. More content to come later in the week for everybody. We'll see you guys later. All right. That's it.